HMAS Perth began life in 1936 as HMS Amphion, a Leander-class light cruiser of the Royal Navy. Amphion, along with her sister ships Phaeton and Apollo, were purchased by the Australian government and commissioned into the Royal Australian Navy during the late 1930s with their new names of Perth, Sydney and Hobart. Named after the city of Perth, she carried its motto proudly, Floriat, may she flourish. HMAS Perth's battle readiness was quickly tested in the Mediterranean, a cauldron of naval warfare. She escorted Allied troop convoys, delivered reinforcements to Crete and Greece, and took part in aggressive naval sweeps along the North African coast. In March 1941, she participated in the Battle of Cape Matapan, helping the Royal Navy score a decisive blow against the Italian fleet. Time and again, she came under air attack. On 30th of May, during the evacuation of Crete, a bomb exploded near a forward boiler room, killing 4 sailors and 9 soldiers. A stark reminder of the danger her crew faced daily. Perth departed the Mediterranean on 19th of July to return to Australia. They reached Fremantle on the 6th of August. Among them was a small, 4-legged sailor who quickly became a legend. The ship's cat, Red Lead. He famously escaped the ship while docked in Fremantle, hiding in a warehouse. It took a full crew search to find him before departure. Then, they proceeded directly to Sydney for docking and repairs. Perth returned to service in November with a new camouflage scheme. She was then sent to the waters of Northern Australia in a valiant effort to stop the Japanese advance through the East Indies, now Indonesia. Later, in February 1942, the commanding officers of HMAS Perth and USS Houston met for the first time, little knowing the magnitude of what lay ahead for them, their ships and their men. On 27th of February, the Allies suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of the Java Sea. Only a handful of vessels, including Perth and Houston, survived the battle. But they were low on ammunition, isolated from command, and unaware of the full extent of the Japanese invasion force ahead. On the night of 28th of February, Perth and Houston sailed for Sunda Strait. Intelligence falsely reported the waters were clear. In reality, they were sailing into the full might of the Japanese Western invasion convoy. Over a dozen enemy warships and 60 transports awaited in Bantam Bay. Despite the odds, the 2 ships engaged the enemy with ferocity, firing upon heavily armed transports and warships. Perth fought valiantly, expending nearly all of its ammunition in the desperate struggle. The vessel sustained severe damage, taking 267 hits from enemy fire. At 12:25 a.m. on the 1st of March, HMAS Perth slipped beneath the waves, followed by Houston minutes later. Over 1,000 Australian and American sailors died that night. Most of the 328 officers and men who survived Perth's last battle were recovered by Japanese destroyers in Sunda Strait on the morning of the 1st of March. The majority of Perth's survivors were destined to work on the Burma-Thailand Railway. On the 12th of September 1944, the Japanese freighter Rakio Maru was torpedoed by a US submarine in the South China Sea. The POWs were in water for over 6 days before being rescued by the same US submarine. The remaining Perth survivors were repatriated when the prison camps were liberated at the end of the war. Of the 324 officers and men who became prisoners of the Japanese, 218 that returned home were physically and mentally scarred by their ordeal. However, 106 did not live to see their enemy defeated and the war criminals brought to justice. The light cruiser fought Italian, German, Vichy French and Japanese forces, making her one of the few ships in the Royal Australian Navy to have fought all the King's enemies during the Second World War. Perth was awarded 8 battle honours. Atlantic, 1939-40, Malta convoys, 1941, Matapan, 1941, Greece, 1941, Crete, 1941, Mediterranean, 1941, Pacific, 1941-42, and Sunda Strait, 1942. The 75th anniversary of Perth's loss also brought news that very little of the ship remained. Illegal salvage operations had stripped thousands of tons of ferrous and non-ferrous metal from the cruiser and destroyed the final resting place of hundreds of men.
The memory of the HMAS Perth is very personal to me because it was relayed to me by my father, telling me his experiences. I now have the duty as a guardian of those memories to pass it forward. I can, as one man, can only do one thing, but a memorial of this nature allows it to be spread more widely and more accessible to more and more people.
In the late 1950s, the Naval Association and the survivors of HMAS Perth met, and they wanted an inspiring memorial to the efforts of HMAS Perth during World War II. The design was put together by a naval architect, Ian MacDonald. Around that time, they raised amount of funds through street appeals to the amount of $23,000. In that time, I was a 13-year-old cadet, so I was virtually involved right from the start when this was just a limestone pad.
My father wasn't a career sailor. He enlisted once the war broke out, and most of the crew, which weren't career sailors, they really didn't know what they were getting involved in. But they thought it was their duty to their country, to defend our nation, and that overrode all the instincts for them.
What these guys went through and the resilience of the crew is quite extraordinary. And I think that's the key thing we've tried to get into this monument here, that it's the people that are important. They're driving the machine.
Growing up with my father and mingling with the other crew members of Perth, they were always very supportive of each other. You could see that bond. Whenever they saw each other, their eyes lit up and they were drawn to each other. Their shared experience basically made them so much stronger.
A sister of a sailor that went down on Perth wrote into the local paper saying that she was very concerned that government and service organisations had forgotten about HMAS Perth I. That inspired me to go to the Naval League Executive and put to them that we should finish off the memorial in the last stage. I was given approval to do that, raise the funds, and I became the project manager to ensure that the building was completed to the final stage. We didn't just want a war-type memorial, we wanted to bring in the human element as well. We designed with the artists a stem which involved having photographs of both the crew and the ship. We had a very tight team that worked daily from 2017 to 2025 on a daily and weekly basis to ensure that we encompass the true meaning of HMAS Perth I and its crew.
There were challenges in materials, in design, in the concept, and most particularly in funding. In terms of the design itself, one of the challenges was this is so different, it's unique, and there's nothing quite that fits in with building regulations like what we have here. We had to stage the construction, the first being the memorial wall, where it's the wall with the 681 names on it. The second milestone was the glass prow that you see here. That was the major part of all the construction work and the most expensive. The third element was the final landscaping. We've had a great team. What held the team together was certainly the knowledge and the experience of those team members. When we were building this, people used to walk up and ask what it was. Once you told them, they were fascinating, but mainly the younger people interested in the story. And explaining that to them, they suddenly got a huge interest of their own in here, and that's what kept us going too.
Personally, I served in HMAS Perth II, and I had to wait until about 1981 before I was able to join HMAS Perth II. I spent nearly 2.5, 3 years in the Perth, and it was during that time that I got to meet the survivors of HMAS Perth I in much closer detail. The actual opening ceremony was quite poignant in many ways. There were a lot of people there who were families of the members of HMAS Perth I who have now all gone. There were many members from HMAS Perth II and III, as well as people who were interested in the history of HMAS Perth I. Following the ceremony, we received a fair amount of information from people who had memorabilia from HMAS Perth I and HMAS Perth II. We were offered some of that memorabilia, and we are codifying and cataloguing it so that we have reference to it whenever anyone would like to do some research on HMAS Perth I in particular.
Our last phase here, now having done the construction, is to move to what we call operations. Operations to us means opening this place occasionally for tour groups, for school groups, and people that really would have an interest in knowing the history of HMAS Perth.
The future of the HMAS Perth I Memorial, it will still be a place where TS Perth, Australian Navy Cadets. The other part of it was we've had quite a bit of interest shown by schools and school children to come through and learn the history of HMAS Perth I.
To me, it's more than just a granite wall with names on it. My father, I know where my father's buried. I know I can visit my father's grave. If they lost their lives in the sinking of the Perth, there's no tombstone for their relative. So I think it's important to have somewhere where they can come and feel what I feel, but at a memorial of this nature.